family, it's Michael here. Hope everyone is doing well. Just one quick announcement that our next Revive Zoom meeting will be Saturday, May 16th at 2 p.m. The link to the Zoom meeting will be sent out in the email a few days before, so hope to see you there. And it's crazy for me now to think that we're in the month of May. That means that we're several months now into this quarantine. You know, the other week, one of my coworkers asked us, is anyone doing anything to document what we're going through right now with having a shelter in place, so that we can tell our children and future generations what we're experiencing? And it got me thinking about, what really is important for us to remember about this time in our lives. One of my spiritual mentors in college, he said that to him, so much of the spiritual journey is simply the act of remembering. That if we could truly remember our stories and our history, that would propel us forward in our journey of faith. And I think he's right, because if you look throughout the Bible, there's all these commands about the act of remembering. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. Remember that you were once Gentiles. Do this in remembrance of me. Because it's in the act of remembering that we can truly soak in and internalize what God is trying to show us and teach us throughout our lives. So I want to share with us a story from the Bible in the book of Joshua, chapter 4. Now, the context for this passage is that the Israelites have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and God has finally led them to the promised land, the land that he has designated for them as their homeland. And so in Joshua chapter 3, they are crossing over into the promised land by going across the Jordan River. But they don't just swim across. God actually dries up the river for them so that they can walk over on dry ground. And that's the scene that we find ourselves in when we get to Joshua chapter 4. As they're crossing over the river, God gives them this instruction. He says in verse 5, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. And each of you," he's talking to 12 men, "take up a stone on his shoulder, one for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, 'What do these stones mean to you?' Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever." So God is telling them to take 12 stones from the middle of the river, where the river was flowing, and move them to where they're camping and set this up as a reminder of this important event, this important moment in their nation's history. And they do this. They take the stones, move them out, the people finish crossing over, and then the river starts flowing again. And then later in the chapter, towards the end, God says this. He says, "When your children ask their parents in time to come, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you shall let your children know, Israel crossed over the Jordan here on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we crossed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." Now, the two passages I just read probably sound kind of similar to each other, but when you look at them in more detail, you actually see that they're showing us this progression of what the act of remembering looks like. See, in the first passage, when the children ask, what do these stones mean? The response is, well, you tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And if you go back and read it, there's actually no mention of God doing anything. It doesn't say that God was leading them. It doesn't say that God was responsible for the drying up of the river. It's simply stating the facts of what happened. It's not until the verse that we read later on where it says, for the Lord your God dried up the river. And then it concludes with sort of the meaning behind all of this, so that you may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. It's a progression. First, the first step is just remembering what actually happened, right? What were the details? What actually took place? The second step is then looking at what happened and asking the question, where was God in that? How was God involved in what happened in my life? And then the third step is then looking at all of that and understanding what God is trying to show us and teach us through these events in our lives. It's a progression. Now, for those of us that have grown up as Christians or in the church, I think there's a temptation to rush to the last point a little too quickly, right? Imagine 5 years from now when someone asks you, oh, what was quarantine like for you back when COVID-19 was spreading? Right, I could see some of us maybe quickly going to an explanation like, oh, it was really hard, but God was with me through it, and he provided these blessings and met me in these hardships. And the problem with that is when we rush to the how did God show up part too quickly, we'll tend to focus on the things that in our minds we think of as more spiritual. The small groups, the community time, how we were dealing with our emotions. And of course, obviously, all of those things are important and they're all part of our story. But we might be prone to leave out things like what shows we watched on YouTube, or how many stores we had to go to before we found toilet paper, or that recipe that we tried and we failed at miserably. The mundane things, the ordinary things that we experienced during this time. But those are part of our story as well. You see, the first step to remembering is to just say what actually happened and not have to put a value judgment on it of was this good or was this bad? Was this of God or not of God? And once we see the full picture of that, then we can move on to ask the question, and where was God in the midst of it all? Now, the other aspect of Joshua chapter 4 that you probably caught on to is that God didn't just tell them to remember these things, but he instructed them to take these 12 stones and set them up as a memorial to remind them of the event. He wanted them to do something tangible, something physical to serve as the reminder. And so my challenge for us this week is, one, to reflect and remember what our lives look like right now, but to find a way to do it in a tangible way. For some of us, maybe it's going to be journaling, or for others, it could be taking a picture every day, or maybe it's making a video like this. Whatever it is for you, let's find a way for us to remember what our lives are like right now in a tangible way. And as you do this, I pray that you would come to see more of God in your lives, more of his involvement in both the big, crazy things and also the mundane and ordinary things. And may you become more attentive to the ways that God is molding and shaping you each and every day. Grace and peace to you, my friends.